Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast. In today's episode, we will talk about a very famous place all of you have heard of. Maybe some of you were lucky enough to visit or even extremely lucky to live there, and this place is Rome. So, we will talk about Rome. This episode is a kind of listening, culture, and we will talk about a couple of words when we're done, just because we're English Plus Podcast, and we can't help it. We will try to teach you a couple of things now and then. But of course, now without further ado, let's enjoy listening about Rome, and then we will talk about the words. Rome is the capital of Italy. This sprawling modern city has many ancient monuments. Rome's history goes back more than 2,500 years. Because of its age, Rome is often called the Eternal City. Rome's many art treasures and historic buildings make the city an important center of European culture. In ancient times, Rome was the center of a mighty Roman Empire. The empire lasted nearly 500 years into the 400s AD. Roman armies conquered the lands that are now Italy, Greece, Great Britain, France, and Egypt. The Romans built many roads from Rome to distant parts of their empire. This network of roads led to a saying that all roads lead to Rome. The Roman Empire's influence is still present. The Romans spread their language, Latin, throughout Europe. Latin is the basis for Italian, French, Spanish, and other European languages. The ancient Romans were great builders. Several of their buildings still stand today. They are among Rome's famous landmarks. The Pantheon is a temple dedicated to the many Roman gods of mythology. The Roman Colosseum is a 4-story amphitheater. An amphitheater is like a football stadium. The Colosseum is where Roman citizens once watched gladiators fight to the death. The Roman Forum was the political center of ancient Rome. The Senate building and law courts were there, along with shops and religious buildings. Many artists painted in Rome. The most famous of them is Michelangelo. He lived 500 years ago. Thousands of people visit Rome each year to see his art. Visitors to the Vatican stare in wonder at the beautiful murals that Michelangelo painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The murals show scenes from the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. Vatican City is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope lives at the Vatican. He is the head of the Catholic Church. There are more than 1 billion Catholics worldwide, making Roman Catholicism the largest Christian religion. Vatican City is an independent country within Rome. It is the smallest country in the world. Do you know that a wolf is the official symbol for the city of Rome? Legend says that an evil king tried to kill twin baby boys called Romulus and Remus by throwing them into the Tiber River. A female wolf found the boys washed ashore. She raised the twins. When the boys grew to be young men, they overthrew the evil king. Romulus then founded the city of Rome on the banks of the Tiber. That was over 2,500 years ago. So, that was the story of Rome. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a thing or two about Rome, this great city, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And now, before I leave you, let's talk about a couple of words in this listening we talked about Rome and discuss their meaning. But before we do that, let me remind you that you can find a link in the description that will take you to our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, where you will find a special post made for this episode that includes the show notes, interactive activities, and a PDF practice worksheet you can download and practice the things you learn in this episode, including the listening practice and the words I'm going to talk about right now. Use the link and improve your English with our daily episodes. And if you like the content we're creating, you can support us by becoming a patron of the show on Patreon and help us continue creating this content you like. And you will also find a link to Patreon in the description of this episode. Now, that being said, let's not waste any more time and let's move on to talk about these words I want to focus on. The first word is sprawl. We said Rome is the capital of Italy. This sprawling modern city has many ancient monuments. Now we have two words actually here, sprawl. Now, if you say a place sprawls, you mean that it covers a large area of land. And this is the meaning of this sprawling modern city. We said it has many ancient monuments, and ancient means belonging to the distant past, especially to the period in history before the end of the Roman Empire. So actually, the Roman Empire itself is related to this word in particular. But sometimes we just use ancient to talk about very old things or something that existed a long time ago. And then we continued on and said, Rome is often called the eternal city. Now, eternal city, what does that mean? Something that is eternal lasts forever. So it is a very profound and deep word you might want to learn. And then we said Rome's many art treasures and historic buildings make the city an important center of European culture. Now, here, what do we mean by historic? When we say something is historic, that means it's important in history or likely to be considered important at some time in the future. So that is historic. And then we continued on and said that Rome was the center of a mighty Roman Empire. What's the meaning of mighty? Mighty is used to describe something that is very large or powerful. And actually, the Roman Empire was both large and powerful. So it was mighty. And we said also Roman armies conquered the lands that are now Italy, Greece, Great Britain, France, and Egypt. Now, what is the meaning of conquer? If one country or group of people conquers another, they take complete control of their land. And that's what the Romans did a long time ago. They conquered large pieces of land, which are now Italy, Greece, Great Britain, France, and Egypt, and even more lands. And then we continued on and talked about the Roman Empire's influence. And we said that the Roman Empire's influence is still present. Now, what is the meaning of influence? Influence is the power to make other people agree with your opinions or do what you want. Now, here, obviously, when we talk about the Roman Empire influence, we're not talking about how they make other people agree with them because the Roman Empire is gone. But we can still find the influence of this Roman Empire in today's architecture, art, etc., a lot of things. We can still see this influence, this effect that comes back all the way from the Roman Empire. So that is also influence. Doesn't have to be always to control. And then we continued on and said the Romans spread their language, which is Latin, throughout Europe. What is the meaning of spread? When you spread something. Now, of course, you can spread butter on bread, and that is one meaning of spreading. But in this context, it's a little bit different. If something spreads or is spread by people, it gradually reaches or affects a larger and larger area and more people. So the Romans spread their language reached a larger area and more people. And as we said later, Latin is the basis for Italian, French, Spanish, and other European languages. And then we continued on and talked about Rome's famous landmark. And we talked about the Pantheon and the Colosseum. We call these landmarks. What is the meaning of a landmark? Now, a landmark is a building or feature which is easily noticed and can be used to judge your position or the position of other buildings or features. Now, we talk about landmarks, those famous buildings like the Eiffel Tower in France, like the Statue of Liberty in the United States, and a lot of other buildings that are very famous and are transformed from just being mere buildings into icons of these cities and sometimes even the country itself. Now, that was landmark. And then we talked about the Colosseum, which is an amphitheater. We said the amphitheater is just like a football stadium. But what was the Colosseum used for? It was a place where Roman citizens once watched gladiators fight to the death. Now, gladiators, in the time of the Roman Empire, a gladiator was a man who had to fight against other men or wild animals in order to entertain an audience. Now, it was brutal, it was cruel, but it was there. So that was the meaning of gladiator. And now let's move on to talk about the last word I want to focus on in this listening, and that is a mural. Now, murals, we used it in this listening when we talked about Michelangelo's murals, which he painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. What do we mean by mural? Now, a mural is simply a picture painted on a wall. And if you've ever seen the Sistine Chapel, whether in person or in pictures, you know exactly what we mean by murals. Maybe these are the best murals in the world, but any other picture that is painted on a wall can be called a mural too. That'll be all. I hope you learned something about Rome. I hope you learned a couple of words along the way. Again, if you want to improve your English and if you want to practice even more, take the link to our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. There we have everything you need to practice and improve your English every day. This is your host, Danny. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.